this short video, we're just going to consider two rather detailed characteristics of the human visual system, whatever that is, that bear consideration together. These are typically considered as distinct aspects of the human visual system, and they can be considered so. They can be considered as distinct, but they can also be considered together, in which case something rather different pops out. Let's begin with the vestibulo-ocular reflex. This is the means by which movements of the head are compensated for so that vision is not disturbed. As I stare at the camera, and move my head, I can keep my gaze fixed. Now, in humans, this is achieved using complicated machinery, undoubtedly, and using primarily the muscles in which the eyeball is cradled. Birds are a little bit different in that their eyeball is set into the head differently. They don't have the same fine muscular control over the eyeballs that we do, so they offload the same business onto neck and shoulders so that we can see it rather more clearly. Here's a very patient owl demonstrating the fixed nature of gaze despite considerable perturbation to the poor owl being done by this scowling research assistant. The owl is very good. Has no trouble keeping its gaze constant despite the fact that it's been yanked around like the devil. Now, there's a big story to be told about this, of course, and expressed in the language of cognitive neuroscience and cognitive psychology. It has to do with compensation. Rotation of the head has to be detected, and then that has to be cancelled out so that vision remains uninterrupted. Notice that this consideration of vestibulo-ocular reflex looks only inside the head. It is a purely subject internal matter. And in order to understand it, we need to open up the skull, look at the brain, and tell ourselves stories about what it's doing. It's a purely internal matter. Smooth pursuit tracking is a rather different business. It's perhaps illustrated here. This gentleman is keeping his gaze fixed upon a moving finger. His head is now immobile. The finger is moving, and vision can attend to the finger, as it were, despite the finger's movement through space. If I move a finger across my direction of gaze, I can follow it with my eyeballs. If I try to do that without the finger there, my eyes will saccade. They will jump from one place to another. Now, perhaps there's a party trick you might learn this, but in general, smooth pursuit tracking requires the presence of an object in the, as it were, external world to be manifest. So with smooth pursuit tracking, we're not looking inside the head, we're looking at the relationship of the viewer to the thing outside. Now, recall what we said in the last video about the difference between wild seeing and aesthetic seeing. And I'm just going to have this girl run through the woods, chased by a bear or whatever, and we're going to consider what seeing is like for her at this moment. Remember, Alvin Noe said wild seeing is active, it's embedded, it's subordinate to the task, escaping from a bear. It requires an openness to the world rather than a state of reflection on or contemplation of that world. It's spontaneous, engaged, it's direct, it's involved, it's acting in concert with the stuff around us. Now let's consider those two things that we picked out. The head is undoubtedly being moved around an awful lot here. When you're running through the woods, your head bounces around an awful lot. There's no obvious target for smooth pursuit tracking, but we can readily intuit that this person is keenly aware of her surrounds, is visually engaged with her surrounds, and that her movements are only understandable, only comprehensible by virtue of the fact that she is sensitively engaging and open to the world around her. Now, I said we can separate these two things. We can talk about them using different vocabularies, but we can also notice that they actually serve exactly the same purpose if we view vision not as image transmission to a immovable subject, but if we view vision relationally, which is the hallmark of Gibsonian accounts of vision. Now, we've had very little to say about them. I mentioned imagistic theories can be usefully contrasted with relational theories. It bothers me somewhat that we speak of these as if they were competing theories to account for the same set of phenomena. Gibsonian accounts remain outside the body, and they look at the relationship of the body to the surrounding surfaces. In a classic study by Lee and Reddish, for example, the behavior of diving gannets was examined. And as a gannet is coming in to dive, it tends to adopt a trajectory perpendicular to the water. And when diving from a height, its wings need to be extended in order to stabilize the dive. When entering the water, its wings need to be contracted or they would be shorn off. And so there arises a crucial point in consideration of gannet diving behavior in which the wings need to be retracted. Now, one could, from the armchair, one could hypothesize that, oh, well, the gannet's brain is doing everything, is doing all this calculation, figuring stuff out where the gannet is modeling the world, and so on. Gibsonians hold off on that. The origin of Gibsonian approaches to visual perception lie in the technical business of figuring out how to land planes. Interestingly similar to the problem of the gannet. When a gannet is diving, there is a pattern of expansion of textured elements on the retina. Now, we're not talking of an image here, but the pattern of light on the surface of the water will cause a textured pattern on the back of the retina, and that will expand as the gannet dives. Furthermore, the rate of expansion provides information relevant to the business of when to fold in the wings. Specifically, the rate of expansion of textured elements on the retina can be understood objectively as having units of time. And so the time to contact with the water is available on the retina if we pay attention. Therefore, any hypothetical role for computation of an internal brain is vastly reduced. Now, this series of videos is mainly concerned with the paradoxes of imagistic theories of vision. And I said that we also have relational theories of vision. I'm not going to go into the paradoxes of relational theories of vision. There's much to discuss there as well. But let's come back to our subject, who has entered the laboratory of the visual psychologist, has had their head clamped and is staring at a fixed distance from a screen, whether it be the human subject or the cat in the classic experiments of Hubel and Wiesel. In both cases, it makes sense to speak of a visual field. Because the head is fixed, the expanse to which one could potentially attend can be considered as if it were a surface, hence the idea of a visual field. Go back now to that person running through the woods. There is no sense to be made of the notion of a visual field there. When the subject is moving in concert with the world, there is no fixed expanse that we can divide up and then internalize. So when we view vestibulo-ocular reflex and smooth pursuit tracking as distinct, and we can do so, we're brought to look inside the subject for the vestibulo-ocular reflex and for mechanistic accounts of that. And we look to smooth pursuit tracking as part of a larger story about the relationship of the subject to the world. But when we view them together, we see that they maintain a fixed relationship between the viewing subject and its environment, its dynamically unfolding environment. That is, joint consideration reveals the existence of an invariant relationship between the organism and its world, something that is missed entirely if we start with the view that they are distinct and separate. Up to now, we've been considering intromission and extromission, the role of freezing the subject, and now this relational character to vision that is missed if we start by separating subject and world. What we're going to do in the next video is dive into the history of media a little bit and note how cultural developments within the sphere of the scientific world have led to changes in the way that we think about seeing and led us to an imagistic theory along way stations that we can actually notice and we can ask into the consequences of the development of tubes, frames, and screens.